Yeah. Killing beasts, that's an understatement. The last scene I left, they thought it was a son of Satan. Burned booth, charred Mike in a bloody basement. Enough charges to catch a nigga, 100 cases.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host A.n, and yeah, this is your Robes and Review. Yeah, we got the world ready to review, ready to get it in. Alright, so check it out. We're checking this channel out by MRBallen tonight, and the links are down below. You guys gotta check them out, man. Some great stories, great content, and some awesome information. Tonight we're gonna be looking at the female Hannibal Lecter. Yeah, if you know anything about Hannibal Lecter, the female Hannibal Lecter, and this is real, we gotta check this out. I've never seen the video, by the way, so we're both gonna be watching that the first time. I think I wanted to try that with you guys tonight, so yeah, let's jump right in. Female Hannibal Lecter. Alright, let's go.
Today's story is about a crime so horrific that a judge handed down a sentence that had never been given before in Australian history.
Wow.
This story is exceptionally graphic. As such, viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to spray the like button's face with sunscreen, but instead use bear spray.
Here we go. I'm really interested to see where this goes. The female Hannibal Lecter, like, wow. Alright.
In 1955, Katherine Knight had the misfortune of being born into a highly dysfunctional and abusive household. Not only was she badly mistreated by her alcoholic parents and cruel older siblings, she was also scorned by the people who lived in the town with her simply because they didn't like her family. Katherine lived in a very small town in New South Wales, Australia, where basically everybody knew each other's business. But despite the abuse, Katherine always tried to focus on the future. She would tell herself that as much as my life is miserable right now, in the future I will have a family of my own, and I will take care of them the way I wish my family had taken care of me. But when Katherine became a young woman and began dating men, all of her relationships would always crash and burn, because inevitably she and her partner would become toxic and abusive, and it would end the relationship. It was like Katherine both didn't know how to be a quality partner and didn't know how to identify a quality partner. Likely because she didn't know what that looked like. She had been raised in this horrible household. But in 1995, when Katherine was 40 and really starting to feel desperate for someone to actually love and to love her back, she would meet a man named John Price, who was also 40, and he just seemed fundamentally different than every other man she had ever dated. He was empathetic to her troubled past, and he seemed to really care for her and really wanted to kind of take her under his wing and love her. And so immediately Katherine just fell head over heels in love with John, and in return it seemed very much like John had fallen head over heels in love with Katherine. That year, Katherine moved in to John's house where he lived with his 3 young daughters, who right away took a liking to her. And so for the first time, Katherine felt like her life was really going the way she wanted it to go. But unfortunately, this would not last. Despite the seemingly perfect start to Katherine and John's relationship, it eventually began to sour when Katherine began to ask John if they were ever going to get married. Katherine really wanted to get married. She wanted to kind of officially have a family of her own that she could take care of, but John was weary of marriage because he had just left a failed marriage, and he told Katherine that realistically he might never want to get married again. And so over time, this issue really drove the two apart, and it all came to a head in early February of 2000 when John and Katherine were at his house. They were in the kitchen, and they got into a heated fight. Before long, they were both getting physical with each other, and during this altercation, Katherine kind of scrambled and grabbed a knife and countered and actually slashed John across the chest. As soon as she did this, the fight came to an end. John screamed at her to leave the apartment and never come back, but Katherine was already storming out of the apartment. They both understood that a line had been crossed, and certainly their relationship was not over. But over the following days and weeks, Katherine, who had moved into a different apartment at this time, kind of near where John was living, she felt very lonely, and even though she knew her relationship with John was not a healthy one, she longed to patch things up with him. She didn't like being alone. She wanted to have that family. And so she decided she would do what she had previously done in other relationships to kind of patch up the relationship after a fight. And so the way she would do this is she would kind of make sure they had the house to themselves, and then she would show up in lingerie, and they would have kind of an intimate makeup moment, and then everything would go back to normal. So
really? Oh my god, how cliche. Well, let's see where it goes. Oh my god, but yo, seriously, that's crazy, man. And we hear about things like this a lot, but where does it stem from? I guess the past, you know what I'm saying? The toxic nature of that, and it just manifested in her adult life. But let's see where it goes. This one's interesting.
On February 29th, Katherine waited until she knew John had left for work, and she went over to his place, and she had a key to it still, and she went inside, and his 3 daughters were there, and so Katherine said hello, and she chatted with the kids for a minute, and then she made arrangements for the 3 kids to go get picked up by a babysitter and spend the night outside of the house. And so then when the babysitter came by the house and picked up the 3 girls, Katherine said goodbye to them, and then Katherine left John's place, and she went out to get her lingerie. Later in the evening, when John came back to his house, he went inside, and he found his kids weren't there, but there was a note from Katherine that explained where his kids were, and how she wanted to make up with him, and she would be back in a little while. Now, John was not happy about this. He was angry that she had decided to just come into his house without asking him. That felt very violating. And then also, she made a decision about his kids without talking to him. It just felt so offensive and wrong of her to do. And so John grabs a beer out of the fridge, he sits down in the living room, and he begins to wait for Katherine to show up. The next morning at 6 a.m., John was supposed to be at work already, but he wasn't. And so his company, who knew he was very reliable, were concerned something was wrong.
Time out. We went from last night, bare on couch, to 6 a.m. the next day. I'm already knowing something went left field right now, so let's just work our way up into that, shall we? Let's go. Let's ease into that real quick. Here we go.
So they sent a worker to his property to see what was going on. And so the worker, he pulls up in front of John's house. You know, John's car is in the driveway, and so the worker's first thought is, well, I guess John must have overslept. So the worker walks up onto John's front porch, and he knocks on John's front door, but there's no answer. And so the worker knocks again, there's still no answer. And so this guy turns around to leave and go back and tell the company, look, I don't know what's going on. But as he's turning around, he notices on the very bottom of the outside of the door, kind of near the edge, the front edge of this door, there looked to be some blood on the outside of the door. It was pretty easy to tell it was blood. And so the worker was immediately very concerned, and he knocked again on the door, but no answer. And so he ran around to the side of the building. He began banging on the windows of John's house to hopefully rouse whoever was in there to come out and to make sure things were okay, but there was silence. And so the worker ran back to his car, he drove back to his office, and after he told his boss what he had found, they decided they had to call the police. The police would show up at John's residence at 8 a.m., and when they got there, John's vehicle was still in the driveway, the house was quiet and dark, and so the police, they walked up to the front door, they knocked on the door, there's no answer, it's silence, and so they walk around to the back of the property to try the back door, and as they're walking into the backyard, they see in the middle of the grass, right behind a window that led into the house, there was this plate of food that had been clearly thrown out of the house and landed face down on the grass. And so the police see that, they're thinking that's pretty weird. And so what they do first, before even going to the back door, is they turn to the window, which clearly the food had been thrown out of, but whoever had done it had then shut the window. And so they go over to the glass and press their faces up against it and peer inside. And there's no John, there's no people, there's nothing inside, it's dark. But right inside of this window is this big dining room table, and it's covered with this amazing spread of food. It looks like a Thanksgiving Day meal had been prepared, but then no one had eaten from it. So they're thinking, okay, well, for whatever reason, one of these plates of food was thrown out the window. It's very odd. And so the police come off the window, they walk over to the back door, they knock a few more times, but after even more silence, they kick the back door down and they go inside. As soon as they step in, there's two officers. They walk straight into the house with the dining room table with all that food on their left, and there's nothing that stands out. They're calling for John. It's silent. Everything is off. Everything's quiet. And they keep on walking into what appears to be the living room where the TV is and where there's a couch. And as soon as they walk in, they see there's blood everywhere. And towards the front of the living room, where the front door actually opened into the house, there was a very obvious pool of blood. Basically, if you stepped into the house, you'd be stepping into this puddle of blood. And as they're looking at this pool of blood, they see there is a distinct blood trail from the pool back into the living room that they have just walked into, and the trail kind of leads behind a couch out of their view. And so they walk around the couch to see what's at the end of this trail, and they find Katherine Knight's crumpled body on the ground. And so right away they rush over to her and they feel for a pulse, and they discover that she actually does have a pulse, but very obviously she's clinging to life barely. And so one of the officers stays with Katherine while they're calling in paramedics to come in and deal with her, while the other officer draws their weapon and they begin searching the rest of the house. And so the officer walks past the front door on their left, and they go into the other side of the first floor, which is basically like this lounge room, kind of like a secondary living room. And as they're looking out across this room, they see there's no one in it, but there appears to be this curtain blocking the entrance to some other side room. And this officer, as they're looking at it, they look down and they notice there's another blood trail that starts from the front of the house. It snakes all the way across this lounge room and kind of disappears into this covered up room. And so this officer yells out for John, but there's no answer. And so he ends up going all the way across, checking as he's going, looking around, but there's no one there. And he gets to this towel, and with his non-shooting hand, he kind of pushes it out of the way, and he looks inside of this space. And it turns out to just be a small closet. There was nothing of note inside. It didn't even make sense that the blood trail had led to this closet. But then, as the officer was kind of wondering why the blood trail ended here, he started to feel something cold on his non-shooting arm. And so he looked down at his arm, and he saw there was this huge streak of blood on his arm. And he knew he had not been wounded in some way. This was not his blood. So how did he get blood all over him? And then he stepped back in horror, because he realized the curtain that he had just moved with the arm that had blood on it was not a curtain. The night before, John sat in his living room waiting for Katherine to return, very angrily waiting for her to come back. But by 11 p.m., she hadn't, and John, who works super early in the morning, he's very tired, he decides to just go to bed. And so he climbs into bed, he falls asleep, and then about an hour or so later, Katherine would walk into the bedroom. She had her black lingerie on that she had bought earlier in the day, and even though John was furious with her and very upset with what she had done that day, seeing her like this suddenly made him think, you know what, all my issues with her could wait. And before long, they were getting intimate together in bed, and then they fell asleep in each other's arms. Later in the night, Katherine would wake up. John's still fast asleep, so she's looking right at him, and she suddenly has this intense sense of disgust. She was convinced that he was taking advantage of her, that the reason he didn't want to marry her was he was just kind of using her. And
wait, what? Are y'all hearing this? Oh my God. All right, let's keep going. Wild story, right?
Anger inside her boiled up, and she decided right then and there that I need to teach this man a lesson he would never forget. And so Katherine very quietly slipped out of the bed. John's still sleeping. She snuck out of the bedroom. She made her way out of the house, and she got into a car, and she drove across town to the apartment she had been staying in for the past couple of weeks, and she grabbed her work tools. Katherine, where she worked full-time, was a meat processing factory, and she worked on the kill floor with the animals that are being turned into meat. And so her skill set was butchering.
Oh my God.
Knives. And so she grabs her kit of butcher's knives.
What are the odds? Like, oh my God. First of all, her past, things that she's been doing, it's like it all leads up to the... You're a butcher with butcher tools that you can just carry around with you at any time you want, and you got all these freaking... What? Alright.
And she drives back to John's place. She goes into the house, she makes her way into the kitchen, and she unrolls this kit full of different sized butcher knives, and she picks the one she wants, she pulls it out, she makes sure it's nice and sharp, and then she made her way into John's bedroom. When she got into his bedroom, John was still asleep. He was lying on his back, covers up over him, fast asleep, and she climbed into the bed, very careful not to wake him, and then when she was straddling him kind of on her knees right over his midsection, she raised the knife up between her two hands, and she brought it down into his chest. John immediately shot up, bucking Katherine off of him. She went flying onto the floor, and then instinctively, John just begins running out of his bedroom. He has no idea what's happening. He's been stabbed, but he probably can't even feel it. It's all adrenaline. He's just running through the house. But by the time he gets to the front of the house, the blood loss had caused him to be so weak he could barely stand. And so he managed to open the front door, but then he collapsed onto the ground halfway between the inside and outside of the house. And so laying there, he reached out with his bloody hand and he grabbed the edge of the door that was partially open and tried to pull himself out of the house. And that's how that bloody print was left on the outside of the door that the worker saw. And as he's trying to pull himself out of the house, Katherine, who had gotten up after being knocked off the bed, she ran to the front of the house and she grabbed his legs and she pulled him back into the house and then shut the door. And then once he was inside, she got on top of him and stabbed him an additional 36 times, all over his body. And then she left him there to bleed times. So while he's dying, she goes into the kitchen and she puts on a large pot of water to boil. And then
36 times. That's a lot of emotional content involved in that. 36 times? Oh my God.
She began setting the plates all around the dining room table for a big family meal. After she was done setting the table, she went back over to John, who was now deceased at this point, and she dragged him all the way across that lounge room on the other side of the house that the officer walked through and then found that curtain. She dragged him all the way across that room to right in front of that closet, and then using her expert skills from working in the meat factory, she proceeded to skin John from his neck all the way down to his toe. And she was so good at it that she was able to skin him in one piece. And she took this skin suit and she draped it over the entrance to this closet. And then she removed John's head from the now skinned torso and she placed it in the water that she had put on to boil earlier. She was going to use his head to turn it into some sort of broth or gravy. And then she grabbed his skinned torso and dragged it into the kitchen and began butchering it and then making different dishes with his meat, different pies and casseroles. And then after she had made this enormous feast out of John's body, she set the food all around the table that she had already laid out, and then she made little placards, little name cards that had the names of each of John's children on them, and she placed them in front of each of the plates, because her intention was to feed them their father. And then Katherine sat down at a plate that she had made for herself, and she began eating John, except it made her sick, and so she opened the window behind her, and she threw her plate of food out into the backyard. And then when she turned back around and looked at what she had done, she decided that instead of facing the consequences, she would just take her own life. And so she went into the bathroom, she grabbed some sleeping pills, and then she cut across the front of the house, walking through that pool of blood near the door. She made her way into the living room, she overdosed on sleeping pills, and collapsed on the ground. However, when the paramedics finally showed up the following morning, they were able to save her. And so once she stabilized in the hospital, she was promptly arrested for John's murder. She would ultimately be found guilty. However, she would never take any responsibility. And then during her sentencing phase, she was given life in prison, but the judge made a special clause just for her. He told them that her file needed to be stamped, literally stamped, never to be released. Basically, there was no hope ever of her getting out of prison. And so after she was taken away, she would become the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's still alive today. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please offer to spray the like button's face with sunscreen, but instead use hairspray.
Listen, and there you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, by far, that is one of the most craziest stories I have ever heard in my life. And I've heard some wild stories. Yo, she cooked him, like all of him, ate him, didn't like the taste, of course, it was a little bit not satisfying, and chucked it out the window like, gross. turned around, realized what she did, and was like, well, I've had enough of this reality. Let me just try something else. Like, what? And you Anyway, let's get a conversation down in the bottom, man. Let me know what y'all thought about it, what y'all think about it. And if you thought that sentence was righteous enough. Because I'm on mine like, I don't know. What? Anyway, please, if you don't mind, hit that like button. If you want to subscribe, that'll be dope too. But definitely let's get the comment section started, because this one is nuts. Anyway, this has been your host, A.n, for the Robes and Review channel. It's been a nuts one. Until next time, guys. Peace. Stay safe.
Cocaine flow, rap nickname true. All black suit with the Bruce Wayne crew. Bad dame riding shotty shit. We came for the loot. Yes, yes, y'all. Yes, yes, y'all. Put them hands up, shit. We came to get a check, y'all. And if you put them hands down, to be a mess, y'all. All up on your vest, chest, neck, left breast, gon' get it pop. Niggas got schemes, bitches tell lies. All up in your face, man, with they fake smiles. Yo, homie, I'm straight. See, I'm focused on my grind. Shit, I'm all about my papes, I ain't tryna waste time. Cause niggas got schemes, bitches tell lies.